I think all the pizza's been properly devoured. So we've had a nice little lunch. So we're gonna move on. Our first big topic that we're going to focus on is public policy, and that's the thing that I get the questions about the most, typically from teachers, and that's one of the things that's most difficult to kind of get across to students. So with that, we're going to spend a little bit of extra time on public policy just so that we have a real good grounding in that. So what I would like you guys to do is, there are some sufficient handouts here talking about what public policy is. So where you see defining public policy, there are about 6 pages of notes there. So I want you in your groups at your tables just to review the material here. Go over to where it says the 3 E's of public policy. So I want you to read among yourselves and discuss, make any key notes that you want to, and in about 5 minutes, I'm going to ask each table to basically come up with their own definition of what public policy is. Okay? So that we're clear on the task, at your tables, you have about 6 pages of information on public policy. I want you to read and discuss with your colleagues, and the task is to develop your own definition of what public policy is. Are we clear? Any questions? Okay. Give you about 5 minutes to begin. Any of the additional handouts that I have, I'll just make sure each table has like an extra one so they can give it to their students or whatever. Once we discuss what public policy is, I'm going to talk a little bit about the 3 E's and a little bit about the economic allocation portion. Then I'm going to take chart paper, give them newspapers, have them find an article that deals with public policy in the newspaper and tell me whether it's local, state, federal, and apply some of what they've read to that. Once we've done with that, I think we can then maybe transition to start talking about how to pick problems and that process a bit. So typically when I do these and I don't have a lot of time, my main thing is that they understand that Project Citizen has to be around public policy. Okay? That, picking up the trash at the park is great, but that may not be public policy. I'm going to just put a thing up here that says parking lot. So if they have questions. looks more like a train. No, I'm good. I might pass out later tonight, but no. That's what I was looking for earlier, to try to open that box. This is usually one of my little kits here. Oh, that's great. If we'd have time, I'll make sure that we have time for them to walk through the boards and the portfolios. I was telling Carmen, usually if it's condensed like this, I want to make sure that I walk through the book, make sure that they have a good understanding as much as possible of public policy, because what you don't want is a bunch of project citizens that don't relate to policy. And so we'll try to get that nailed down, and then give them a newspaper activity where they will identify public policy, whether it's state, local, or federal, and then give them some time to talk about how they're going to pick the problems. So. Oh, cool. We can do that, not a problem. When your table gets finished with the reading portion of that, continue to discuss it, but then I want you to write down your definition of public policy and have one person at your table be willing to share that out as the definition for your table. This one should be easy to figure out, right? Glad you brought that up, absolutely, because the cool thing about Project Citizen is you could say it's kind of non-competitive, so there are rubrics. So, you know, you'll look at the criteria, and it's they either have superior, outstanding, exemplary, something like that. But we have scoring rubrics, and we have what status that they're in. So it's perfectly possible to have like 2 winners if you want. What they do in South Africa, it's a nice jacket by the way. They have 3 provinces that go to nationals, so it's, you know, it is a big thing. But once they go to nationals, they recognize everybody. So there's not really a winner. When I trained in South Korea, they were much more particular about that because it's that Asian competitive thing. And the school that won there, their kids, all 8 of them got a free university ride. Yeah. Yeah. So here I am trained and saying, now it's about the process and make sure, it's just about engagement. And they're like, no. You either win or you lose. So, but that was always something that was debated philosophically a lot with Project Citizen, because my thinking is, you could still do a hearing at the local level. I want kids to be engaged in that democratic process and not feel intimidated about government. But I also understand the incentives. And if you had incentives, that's great, when we had funding, we would fund their trip to the Capitol or Louisville. And that was always a big deal. So I'm working on that again. But it's tough sledding right now. Okay, take about another minute and a half and finish up with your definitions. Make sure that your colleagues around your table have consensus with that. Yeah, you can write it on that or you can write it on anything. Just make sure one person at your table is willing to share your definition. All right, at your tables, raise your hand if you have your definition, you're ready to go. Raise your hand. Are we good? We good? Excellent, excellent. Okay. All right. Do I have a volunteer table that would want to go first? Yes. I'm sorry. Go ahead, please. Okay. All right, that's good. Read that one more time for me. I want to hear it one more time. Read it a little bit more methodically, okay?
Public policy. A policy that concerns the public that either needs to be issued, fixed, or modified for its diverse and beneficial.
Very good. Okay, well done. Very good. This table here. Okay. Rules that deal with issues. Very good, very good. Other volunteers? I was in the Army, I got volunteered a lot, it was like they would never volunteer for anything, so I got volunteered a lot. So I'm going to start volunteering. Yeah, back here. Read that again. Resources and issues. I like that. Very good. Here. I want to make sure I heard that. Did you say, read the last part again about value? Nice. Okay. All right. Another table, please. Oh. Go ahead. Yes, please.
Public policy is a solution to a problem that affects
pollution that affects a certain population. Okay. All right. I have 5. There's one more table out there somewhere. Yes. Okay. One more time. Okay. Okay. All right. Now, for you team leaders, okay, you've noticed how we've had you guys develop your own definitions for public policy. What I'm going to ask, particularly because you're going to be going back and working with your other fellow students here, one process that you can do, and you can use this when you do your problem solving, when you're picking your issue, is what I could have is I could have you come up here and put dots by this, kind of what do you think is the best definition. You can also look at commonalities here. Now, just from your brief definitions of public policy, we are seeing some similar things here, okay? Obviously, we're seeing rules or steps, issues, okay, that address certain things. They address the community, they address certain groups of people, and sometimes they can, even when they're issued, they can be modified and adapted, okay? So I want you to think about public policy in a variety of ways. You have a couple of really good handouts there, and I have to sort of bow down to one of my favorite professors who I have the utmost respect for him. It's a guy by the name of Larry Gersten. So a lot of these handouts are his. Larry Gersten is a professor of public policy at San Jose State, okay? I've had the pleasure of being in a couple of workshops with Larry, and he talks a lot about public policy, and he uses a couple of examples that I'm going to briefly explain here, okay? First, I want to make sure that we're all set on what public policy is. Those are all very good definitions of public policy. And I think it's very important, particularly for the students here, when you go back and you're talking to your fellow students, that you have an understanding that you're able to articulate what public policy is, okay? And then there's a great definition here, okay? What is policy? It's a simple conceptual definition. Might be laws or rules that tell us what we can or cannot do. Public policy is in a lot of different things. All of you folks that are middle school students, the beginning of school, what's one of the first things that they have you do when you're in homeroom and you're going through all that administrative stuff and you're sending all those lovely forms back to your parents to sign? What's the one thing that you have to sign off on typically? What? Say? The syllabus, okay, that's part of it. And then, do you ever have a school code of conduct or acceptable use policy on the computers and stuff like that? That, my friends, is policy. Because your site-based council somewhere along the line has said, we have to have an acceptable use policy when students are using the computer so that they won't be surfing inappropriate sites or doing inappropriate things in that. That is a policy. That has been discussed by your site-based council. It's been put into policy. It's been approved by your school board. Policies, simply put, are just rules, okay? Now, they can manifest themselves in different ways. Sometimes they're laws that are passed by your government, okay, like a speed limit or the acceptable age for you to buy alcohol, or even how old you can be to get a hunter's permit or fishing license, okay? Sometimes they're regulations. For example, big regulation here lately in Kentucky, for those, I'm from Eastern Kentucky, so coal producing there is a big thing. But just recently the EPA passed more stringent guidelines on the amount of mercury that could be in the air from coal emission power plants. So sometimes they can be regulatory, sometimes they're passed by Congress, sometimes they can be local ordinances. Does that all make sense? But in essence, particularly for you students, just understand public policy, those are rules. Like the one person said here, those are rules that are sort of debated. They reflect the value in many ways of your community that you live in, okay? All right. I am going to skip over here. Well, first, I want to tell a Larry Gersten story. I'm sorry. I got to do this. Because in many ways, Project Citizen sort of illustrates this. As I said, Larry Gersten is a personal friend and a great presenter on Project Citizen. And he always tells this one story about what Project Citizen is, and particularly about the process. So he tells this story about this man and woman, this husband and wife. And her husband is a workaholic, okay? Works all the time. But she finally convinces him to take a vacation. So they go to Hawaii. Beautiful, romantic, you know, the wife's finally got her husband to kind of calm down a bit and stuff. So they go to the hotel, it's really nice. The concierge there is like, hey, you know, you really need to get out and see some of the island. It's absolutely beautiful, all of the flowers, vegetation, waterfalls and stuff like that. And he says there's this great little town close to the hotel. It's called Lahana, okay? So you really need to go there. The flowers in Lahana are absolutely famous. You know, you really need to go. The wife says, oh, that sounds so great and stuff. And the husband's like, okay, whatever, all right. So they rent a car, and they're driving to Lahana, okay? So the husband's driving, gets behind people that are driving slow and stuff like that. So he's like, God, come on, man, go. So he's like, you know, passing that car and stuff. His wife's like, honey, come on, slow down, it's vacation time, okay? You know, just chill out, it's all good. So he's fuming and fussing, and, you know, he's driving fast, trying to get to Lahana, okay? Because he wants to get there, make his wife happy and so forth. So after about an hour and a half driving, he finally, frustrated because he didn't get there fast, pulls into Lahana, gets out, and he sees this old man at this little old store. He's just sitting there. He's got some arts and crafts things that he was wanting to sell. And so the husband gets out and he starts looking around. He's like, is this Lahana? Old man's like, Lahana. He's like, oh. Where's all the flowers? Where's all the foliage and the vegetation? The guy at the hotel said the Lahana's famous for all its flowers and stuff. Guy's like, no flower in Lahana. He's like, what do you mean no flowers in Lahana? He's like, flowers on the way to Lahana. So the point is, take your time. It's about the process, and that's what Project Citizen is. So it's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a great challenge for you. But don't forget the process along the way. So when we're talking about public policy, when you're talking about your problems specifically, be methodical. Talk to your friends. It's about learning about this process. So don't necessarily rush through it. And that was the great lesson I got from Larry Gersten, and that was one that I wanted to impart to make sure that I didn't forget when we were doing this. Okay, so this handout right here, public policy defined. Let's take a look at this. I just want to make sure we're clear on the definition. Public policy is the decisions, the commitments, and the actions undertaken by those who hold or affect positions of government. Okay? I'm going to read that one more time, okay? Public policy is the decisions, the commitments, and the actions undertaken by those who hold or affect positions of government. All of your definitions had part of that, okay? And I particularly like the one who talked about the value that the community places there, okay? Because that is very true. Public policies are a direct reflection often of the society's values. So keep that in mind. And that's why they may differ from place to place as well. Even in a sort of a homogeneous area like, you know, Western Kentucky, you may go from district to district in your schools and you may find different types of public policy. Henry County in Novak just adopted a policy that basically, because a lot of our schools have prohibitions on cell phones and multimedia devices and things, Henry County just totally shifted the paradigm, and they said, you know, look, if kids want to bring in any kind of device they want to, they can't use them during class, but if they want to use them in the halls or so forth, they have free carte blanche to do that. And a lot of the teachers are also having them use them as part of their class. So once again, a policy can be very reflective of that community. All right. And there's Larry Gersten's quote, "The road to the outcome is more important than the outcome." It's about the process. You'll hear me say that a lot. Okay, now we're going to turn over here to the 3 E's, okay? This is going to be extremely important when you guys start looking at your problems and you start thinking about your action plan, about what you want to do, okay? The 3 E's are important for a lot of reasons. First of all, when you start talking about a public policy, you can do a number of things. One, you can establish a policy where there's not been a policy, okay? For example, at your school, if you had no bullying policy on the books at your school, you would have to start fresh and write a policy, okay? You'd have to go back and probably do some research, look at other places that did it, but you would have to start from the beginning and write a policy. Does that make sense? Okay? A much more, or an easier way to do it is to take a look at enhancing your policy. So let's say, for example, your school does have a bullying policy, but it may not be properly enforced or it may not be stringent enough. So then you might want to enhance that policy, okay? All right? For example, there are dropout regulations and dropout laws in Kentucky, but they just had a big debate about enhancing that, changing the age of what the dropout age was, okay? The last one here is enforcement. This is important too. I had a little school in Hardin County, Meadowview Elementary, and as you know, most places have a smoking ban in public places. Well, their school district had a smoking ban. You know, you couldn't smoke on school grounds and so forth. Well, people still were smoking on school grounds, so their Project Citizen was basically the enforcement of that policy. Think about that when you are addressing policies, okay? All right? Another one of that was an example. There was a county that they had a policy on dealing with stray animals, and they weren't supposed to be, they were supposed to be humanely destroyed, was the policy. Well, how that was being enforced was the game warden was popping the dogs with a gun. So they wanted stricter language in terms of enforcement to make sure that that was humanely done. Okay? So 3 examples there when you start thinking about your problems and how you're going to address them with public policy. Okay. Any questions about this so far? Okay. Oh, and for you folks, if you do have a question or something comes up, you can write it on a Post-it note and park it up here in the parking lot, and I'll try to answer it or take a look at it or find someone who can find an answer for you. Okay. We need to have you guys do some of the heavy lifting here. So here's what we're going to do next. You are going to get a newspaper. Sports page here. This one might be better. And we are going to identify some examples of public policy. So I'm going to give a couple out. All right. Now, I'm going to give each of you a piece of chart paper. I want you to find in your newspapers, you just have to find one, okay? I want you to find an article that talks about public policy, and I want you to define what that public policy is. 2, I want you to tell me whether it's local, state, or federal. And 3, I want you to tell me how effective you think the policy is. Okay? So let me repeat that. You're going to look through your newspapers and you're going to find one example of public policy. You're then going to tell me whether it's local, state, or federal. And 3, you're going to tell me whether you think it's effective or not. Okay? It is about 17 after. Let's take about 13 minutes to let you do this activity, and we're going to share out. Okay? All right, is there any questions about the task? I'll be dropping off some chart paper and some markers. Okay. I thought I was running everybody off at first. Oh, sure. Yeah, I know. Those were their perks, right? Yeah. It's good to have them involved. Mm-hmm. Yeah, write what the policy is. Then 2, say it's a local policy. And 3, tell me whether you think it's effective. Okay. Marker. Well, I'm sorry. Do you need another one? Okay. Not a. Yeah, there's several. Yeah, take them off if you need to. Can I borrow your book for just a second, too? Now, this is a good exercise. I like to do this, and then for the students, there's a part in the Project Citizen where, even on the boards, it talks about the constitutionality of it. So there's a constitutionality opinion form. So your problem, once you identified your problem and you're putting policy, you really need to check, even before you get too deep into it, whether it's constitutional or not, okay? So that's important too, and we're going to talk about that process a little bit too. It's called the constitutional opinion form. So that's always good to know too. Your problem's going to be what? Cell phone usage. Well, I can tell you if that's what your group decides on and so forth, you won't lack. There's a ton of research being done on that right now, and there's a lot of pedagogical stuff, flipped classrooms and things like that. I have one teacher in Bullitt County where she'll have them do a survey. They go to their cell phone and they literally, she's like, okay, how many people vote this way, and she can get instantaneous things on it. Okay. But then there's other schools who say, they're a distraction, and there's research on that too. So my only thing, if you decide that is your problem, be prepared to look at reams of research, both pro and con. So. Do what? Can it be both? It's a beautiful question. Absolutely, yes, it can be both. Mm-hmm. And you're getting a little ahead, but that's good, because when you start thinking about policy a lot of times, a big question is the dollar signs. Who's paying for it? Okay? So it could be a state policy that impacts the local government or your local community. So it's going to translate into a policy there too, but who ends up paying for it? That's always a part of it too. Has to pay. Now I want you, so no one has to pay for bullying?
I mean, the bully has to pay for it. No one has to pay for anything at the end of the school.
It's a what? Is there going to be somebody in charge of overseeing this policy somewhere along the lines?
So that right there just changes from local to state almost, because the state, every teacher's paid, each state, paid. No matter, but that's what he's getting, it's like, it can start out one thing. But the education said it's far along there. You're gonna be able to do it in the government, you end up being
I'm just offering some suggestions. You know, it's kind of like when you think about the seatbelt compliance rule. It's obviously seatbelts save lives. I mean, you can look at the statistics there and so forth. But if you don't, and that even affects federal dollars, because states that have lower speed limits and seatbelt laws get more Department of Transportation funding.
states that don't
Yeah.
require,
Yeah. So
second.
whenever you start thinking about policy and putting policy in place, there's always an economic variable somewhere there. It's an opportunity cost, a hidden cost, or something. There's a cost associated with it. Just think about it in those terms. But I like how you're thinking, and I like that you guys have already seen that, you know, there's connections. So. Okay, policy. No texting while driving. Okay. The number of citations, okay. Would that be your only measure of effectiveness, you think? That was all that was mentioned. Good. Hey, I like that. That is a good way when you're putting your board together, when you're thinking about your project. You want tangible things that you can document and prove. Okay. Sure. Yeah. And I was one of those folks who, not as bad. I had one friend, and man, she was terrible at texting and driving. And they've done a lot of studies to say, I mean, that's more unsafe than actually driving under the influence. So that's good. Yeah. Yeah. I like this one. It's a statewide policy. Any connections you think to federal policy in any way? Gotcha. This is good, and this is a good example. And for you team leaders, when you're going back and talking to your fellow colleagues about the problems that you're going to do in the policy, this is kind of a format that you can take. Is that, you know, when we advocate for a policy, let's take a look. Is it local, state, and understand. If you want to deal with a federal policy, the level of difficulty is exponential, okay, because of who you have to talk to and who you have to convince. and even the research you're doing, and even figuring out who's called. For example, if you were saying, the EPA regulations on coal emission plants are too strict, so we want to change that. Well, you're not going to go to your city of Murray and get them to change that. You would have to go to the federal level to change that. And then who would you even have to address to change that? Okay? Women in the military. Okay, you could say, hey, there shouldn't be women in the military. Well, who do you have to talk to for that? Or there should be women in the military. You got to figure out who are the stakeholders, who are the people that have authority to do that. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, hey, dress code at your school? Yeah. Absolutely. Needs to be tangible, it needs to be realistic. For example, it's a great goal to say we want to end world hunger, but are you going to be able to initiate public policy to end world hunger? Now, what you could do is you could initiate policy to have your city council fund a shelter and fund food for the homeless in your community. That's taking the issue and making it doable and having it deal with public policy as away from what we were talking about earlier about not being able to. Okay? I'm sorry? How do you win? It's the drive to Lahana. It's the drive to Lahana. It's the process. How do you win? Winning is knowing how do you influence and make policy. How does your government work? That's how you win. It's okay. It's all right. All right, let's take another minute and finish up your posters. Oh, okay, you guys, are you good? Getting there? Okay. Is it local? Okay, yeah. All right, good. Good. Mm-hmm. It's federal allows for. Yes. Wow. That is a big issue too. Cool. All right. Constitutional opinion. Okay. Constitution. Opinion form. Here we go, page 44. take just another minute or two and finish up your assignment here. Aren't those great things? Awesome. So, your teacher, tell me some of the things that you did to study the Constitution. Civics. Okay. Yeah, it was Avatar. They were like, fictitious kind of characters and that sort of thing. iCivics is a pretty good supplemental program. Do you ever use We the People? Okay. Okay. Well, actually, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights are different, but that's all right, because think of, the amendments are in there. Okay. What is an amendment? So that's very good. Okay. If you amend something, what are you doing? You're changing it. Yeah. So the amendments are basically the changes that. Yeah. So, and those are important too, particularly those first 10. So, all right. Good stuff. So, did you talk very much about who wrote the Constitution? Who's considered the father of the Constitution? Wait, you're in the ballpark. Jefferson wrote the Declaration, but James Madison, did she ever talk about James Madison being the father of the Constitution? Jimmy Madison. So, good. Well, that's good. Good. Well, we're going to look at the Constitution here in just a minute. That's why I gave you those copies. Well, no, but I will make sure that your classroom gets sets of those, and I'll tell you how to do that. So, not a problem. And I used to use We the People a lot, and I like We the People for lots of reasons. There's a congressional style hearing that goes with it, but in the back, you've got the Declaration, you've got the Constitution. It's a really nice resource for you. All right, let's go ahead and finish up. Modified. Oh, that's the Amish thing, isn't it?
No, when the council passes Parkway, a new sticker board.
What's that about? That's interesting. Huh. No. Huh. Actually, the first reading of a new. Huh. Oh, is this like for parking?
City sticker.
City stickers. So, you got to have one.
Yeah,
Well, that's just a way to raise revenue then.
right.
Wow.
But see, they already had an ordinance, but they didn't enforce it. So now
Enforce-
they changed it and gonna try to, they modified it
Wow. Yeah, enhance it like you're. Oh, wow.
and trying to enforce it with a $50 late on it.
Man.
Plus the cost of the city sticker.
Wow. I bet citizens aren't real thrilled about that. Well, I don't know. I mean, I've worked in places where they have, a city tax, but I mean, once again, how do you collect those things? I know that just came out of my check and went, yeah.
Right. And you can't get it back.
No, you can,
And it doesn't matter if you live there or not. If you work in the city, you have to pay those taxes.
sure do.
I do.
My accountant allowed me to write it off, but, or a portion of it. We're good here? Are we good here? Good here? Good here? Good here? All right, I think we're just about good to go. I would like for us to go ahead and share this out. Also, if you have any questions about anything, remember, you can write a note, or we can bring it up at this time. So why don't we start right here? Okay.
We found a local one. It was Lawrenceburg Fiscal Court's Transportation Committee met to try to solve the safety at an intersection called Three Corners, and it was not effective. The magistrate feels that death will need to occur before policy change.
Okay. All right. So to just clarify, it's a traffic. They were wanting to try to do a traffic type of policy, but they don't have sufficient funding for it. They don't feel, and they're thinking something terrible is going to have to happen before they do that.
They say there's not enough accidents, not funding issue.
Not enough accidents.
Someone dies, then they'll change it.
Wow. Well, that's interesting. That's very interesting there. I'm going to try to make connections with each one of these that come up. Very quickly, Henry County, Kentucky, Eastern Elementary, really small rural school in Henry County. And it's rural, so there's buses that have to go in a lot of pretty bad roads. Their 5th grade students proposed a Project Citizen to put together a different kind of guardrail, one of those safety guardrails instead of the normal guardrail. They brought in road engineers from the State Department. They did an analysis of what it was going to cost, and also what the potential benefits would be if there was litigation or something happened. These were 5th graders. They did a phenomenal job with that. So once again, if you were the students there in Lawrenceburg, could you take this issue and probably maybe do something with this? Possibly. Yeah, okay. All right. I find it interesting that they're saying, we can't do public policy because there's not been enough deaths, there's not been enough tragedy involved with fixing this. However, why aren't they doing this? Why aren't they addressing this issue, you think? In the article, did they put any kind of cost associated with this? Okay. Interesting. Very interesting. Okay. All right. So that, I think, is obviously, does everybody agree? Local? This is definitely local. And these are similar issues you're going to see in local communities dealing with that. I think I'm going to transition over here to the next table because I have a feeling yours is local too, right? Okay. Tell us about yours. Okay. I want to clarify just so we all understand. So, in essence, you have to buy a sticker if you work in the city of Murray, and that sticker has to be on your vehicle to demonstrate that you are working in Murray. And where? Oh, and live. Okay. Oh, okay. All right. Interesting. Very interesting. So this is a way to enhance or actually enforce the current public policy that's on the books there. Okay. Starting collecting it. Interesting. Is it effective? Is it an effective policy? Okay. Did they mention that this was a way just to kind of make sure that they were collecting the money more? Something I always do with as part of Project Citizen as well, and since that is a current policy, and There is in your Project Citizen book, page 44, and this is good for all of you to understand, is that before you propose a policy, before you get real deep in this policy, it needs to make sure that it's vetted and it's constitutional, okay? So there's a constitutional opinion form, and it walks you through the process. There's a checklist. Government is not allowed to interfere with a person's freedom of belief. Our proposed policy does not violate this limit on the power of government. I wonder if we use this constitutional opinion sheet with this current policy, would it meet the constitutional test? Does local government have the power to basically tax for, you working in the community, living in the community, so forth? Or is that something that would be violated by the Constitution? Now, how would you figure that out? Yep. Absolutely. You're right on. The first place you'd look at is your city ordinances. Often before the city will draft an ordinance, they will have their attorney basically check to see that it's meeting the Attorney General's opinions and things like that. But it's a legal process. They do have the right to do that. Okay. Now, citizens. What would citizens do? Well, I mean, you have an election every couple of years to elect your city council people, or magistrates or whatever. But I bring your attention to this. Students, when you start putting your Project Citizens together, make sure you go to the constitutional opinion form to make sure it's constitutional. Okay? All right? For example, cell phone usage. How does that impact a student's right of free speech? What have the courts said about the right of free speech in schools? So you might want to look at that. All right? Okay. Good. 2 examples of local ordinances, one not policy, one policy, very interesting. Let's transition over here. Let's talk about that a little bit more, because that is interesting. Kentucky did pass that no texting thing, not at this legislative session, but the last legislative session. But so your article is saying that it's very difficult to ascertain whether they're texting, and so compliance of the policy is difficult. Is that? Interesting. So did they have any kind of statistics of how many people have been, written up or ticketed? Interesting. 40%. That tells you something too, maybe. Not saying it's not important, but our courts and the judges, are people at the judicial branch feeling like this is a big priority if they've got other things, This is definitely state, though, isn't it? How do we know that? It's a statute, isn't it? It's a law. Your legislatures passed a law that was signed in. So there is a state law. If you went to the Kentucky Revised Statutes, open that up, you would find KRS statute, point, 3 letters or 3 numbers and something, that they had passed that as a law. So that is a state law. Just like you going to school, there's compulsory attendance laws. So once again, for Project Citizen, when you're looking at something, you want to find out, is it already a law on the books? That's easy. I mean, well, not easy, but you know that there's a volume of state laws there. It gets a little trickier when you're looking at ordinances and things like that, or regulatory agencies, because then you have to go find that group. Did this group over here do something with texting as well? So what was your article, in what newspaper did this come out of? The Ledger? Okay, what newspaper are you using? Oh, okay. Oh, it's the same newspaper. Okay. All right, go. It's okay. It's good. Hey, well, what do you think lawmakers or lobbyists might do with this? Okay, so we have a law that says no texting, but we're worried that the compliance of it's not really being met, and they're not sure in terms of enforcement. What are some things that you think they might do? If this was going to be your Project Citizen, what would you think? How would you deal with this? And I'm talking to both groups here. Possibly. Go ahead.
Stricter consequences. It said that some people would never even made it to work because they just didn't.
You know, double, triple the yeah. Make the fine very pertinent. I know that. Wow, this is a terrible thing to say since I'm doing civic education, but I have a propensity to speed, so I have been to the traffic court on more than one occasion. And I remember one time I got pulled over. I was heading to the airport, and so I saw the local county sheriff. So I'm frustrated and I already undo the belt, and I'm pulling out my wallet to get my license out. So I get written up for not having my seatbelt on either. It was a $25 fine, and even though I was like, "Hey, I was just getting my wallet out," he said, "No matter." He said, "I didn't see you with the seatbelt on." So it was a $25 fine for not wearing the seatbelt. But your point is well taken. If they really wanted to put teeth into that, then I wonder if it was like a $300 or $500 fine.
Like drinking, you pay a fine, but you also lose your license.
Yeah. And there's a lot of research that suggests that actually texting is just as dangerous, if maybe not more so, than driving under the influence. I know it was funny because a lot of cars now. I don't want to bore you with all the specifics, but let's just say I had a little auto mishap yesterday. I was driving to Louisville, hit a big piece of metal or something, and it went up underneath my car, and I had to get towed in, and I've got a rental and stuff like that. And in my rental, I was punching in the navigation system, but when I was driving, it wouldn't let me change any of the navigation stuff. He said you have to be not moving, you have to be stopped in order to set the navigation stuff. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. So your point about technology, cameras, things like that, it could be that, in the future you're going to have automobiles that will detect or maybe not allow you to text or block the texting or whatever. Could be. Yeah, it is. That's a great point too, because sort of as a libertarian, I have those concerns as well. Is that okay? You should wear a seatbelt, but if you're dumb enough not to wear a seatbelt, I mean that's kind of your problem. But how much do we allow government to regulate those things in terms of safety? Yeah. Yeah, you're right. You can't have your big 32-ounce. Well, you can for a limited time in New York there and stuff. Well, but the point is that when we start talking about public policy, that is a debate that has to happen too. How much do you want government regulating habits that should be responsible habits of individuals? It's a great question. Okay. And there's also a cost associated with that. My thinking is too, we kind of had this conversation over here as well. I'm sure when you start looking, if you're getting federal transportation funds, I'm sure they have a checklist and they're looking, okay, do you have a seatbelt law? Do you have a no texting law? Do you have a speed limit that is conducive to what we want? So there are economic consequences with that too. And particularly students, those are all the things that you need to consider when you start talking about your Project Citizen. Because if you go in very naive thinking that there's not going to be a cost associated with something, trust me, there's always an economic cost somewhere, okay? And that's something you need to always consider when you're talking about policy. as well as personal issues which go back to the constitutional form. So, good, excellent. Who's my groups that have not went? Here? Okay, go ahead. Wow, and that would be very complex to try to deal with it. That's a federal piece of legislation. So, where would you even go to start getting information about this? Internet would be one place, okay. You could probably contact your legislators, your federal legislators, and because you know, one of them is probably going to be working in this in some facet or another. I'm from Owen County, Kentucky, and Jeff Davis used to be the congressman there, and he had done a lot of legislation on bank legislation. He proposed a piece of legislation that if it was going to cost over X amount of dollars, that it had to be, if it was a regulatory reg, that it had to be gone through Congress and so forth. But he was very helpful with some of our Project Citizen folks in terms of pointing them in the right places to get information. Always helpful. But yeah, that's obviously that's an example of federal legislation. And as I think I made the comment over here, if you're doing your Project Citizen, understand the more that you go up, the more complex it's going to get. Okay? So like with this, no doubt you're going to have to be contacting a federal bureaucracies. You're going to have some help from your representatives and things like that. The complexity of trying to do a Project Citizen around that is going to be much more complex than trying to design something in terms of a red light or a guardrail for a local stop in Lawrenceburg. Okay? All right, have we hit everybody? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I think that you never know something until you can never know until something's changed, and as well as testing. If their policy didn't work before, who says it's going to work now? That's what people's actions.
Very good. Very good. This particular topic here, bullying, is a very intriguing topic. What you were talking a little bit about you know, privacy rights and things like that. And I thought that the legislature may tackle this a little bit more. I know that the school, Elkhorn Middle School in Franklin County, they actually had Julie and Carol come in and talk to their students about this. But what we're finding is that there's no consensus among school districts about defining what bullying is. And that kind of bleeds over sometimes into, I mean, do you just have students that may have certain disabilities as well? You get into that privacy issue. This is a tough issue, a very tough issue. You're seeing, I've seen a lot of schools tackle this with Project Citizen, but I haven't seen, there's been a few states that have had coherent anti-bullying legislation, but it gets real murky. Because once again, the penalties involved, what is bullying? Even trying to define what bullying is, and then trying to put punishments to that. The students at Elkhorn wanted more stringent punishments put on those kids that were doing the bullying. And you know, you can empathize and feel for those students because they're saying, hey, you know, these students are messing up our educational process. On the other hand, what constitutes bullying? Is it systematic? Is it prolonged? Or is it just, one kid, picking on another? Is that what adolescents do? It's a tough issue, a very tough issue. And it's really tough when you start trying to figure out enforcement of it. Because who's going to enforce that? Where's the enforcement of anti-bullying going to come from?
See, they might, they could change it from local,
Oh,
state to, federal.
absolutely. And what you're seeing a lot of times, and that could even bleed over into like a lot of the talk about anti-gun legislation, mental health preparedness, mental health caring.
Bullying, but how far is it that you call it? What do like you just said, at what point do you make it or do you even consider it to be bullying? Well, how far did the kid take it to even make it bullying?
Yeah.
To where we do it?
And you have the litigation point of it, because as a school, I mean, your worst fear would be, okay, you have a kid who's, is he bullying or not? And then there's if he does something violent at the school, is the school going to be held responsible? Also, what if he does do something and harms another student? So you have a lot of issues here. And this is a classic example of a good idea, but then again, you start thinking about the economic cost of where it's going, who's going to enforce it, how's it going to be paid for, what could be the ramifications of that, good and bad, litigation, all of those things. So it was interesting because Julie and Carol was talking about some of those very things with this group of students. The group of students at Elkhorn had actually drafted some pretty good language in their school policy about bullying. But once again, it came to what is bullying? How do you even define it? So I would see, much like the texting thing, I think you would see this moving up. I was, not surprised being in Kentucky, but I thought the legislature would give this more due, given politically what's going on.
Well, now, isn't it just, was something that said that they couldn't expel people for bullying to a certain amount, like the rest of the school year or something, and they were then restraining, because that puts them out in society and leaves them wide open to do even worse.
Having worked with school districts, I mean, even when you start talking about, even if you expel a student, you still have a responsibility. You have to educate that student in some fashion or another, even if that means another facility, another place, and so forth. So, I mean, it's just not like, you kick them out and it's done. But it's definitely an interesting issue. And how school districts and even the state reacts to that policy-wise will be very interesting.
Like you said, they can look at it and say, okay, this person was bullied, but it's not about this person has a mental disability,
Yeah.
I mean, you can't kick them out because they're not, they're not in the right mind.
It's a very complex and challenging issue. All the more, which makes it all the more so, how do you deal with it policy-wise? So, it's very good. All right, so, okay, let's do a little check here. How do we feel about, do you feel better about what public policy is? You sort of know the domains that you're dealing with there. So when your students begin to write, do a Project Citizen, you're going to know, okay, they're going to be dealing with either a local, state, or even federal. I want to address this very quickly, though, and this came up back here at this table, and I thought that was a good point. Your problem and your issue needs to be tangible. It needs to be able to be solved. I'll give you the best example I can say. Let's say you came up with a Project Citizen, I would like to end world hunger. It's a very noble goal. I think we all would agree that that would be a great thing to do. In terms of Project Citizen, is that a doable Project Citizen? Probably not. Probably not, okay? So, I mean, it's like picking up trash at the park. It has to deal with public policy. It has to be real. Now, what you could do at the local level, you could go to your city council and say, hey, I want you to allocate X amount of dollars to fund the community shelter to establish a food pantry for those, for families who might need food short term. And what we're going to do is we're going to also go and have a food raiser ourselves to help that. That makes it Project Citizen. That has a public policy connection to it, okay? Now, that's not to say, don't negate your ambition. I mean, there's been great examples of individuals starting, things on Facebook to do those types of things. But remember, it has to have a public policy connection, and it should be something that is, doable. Okay? All right. Rebecca, you want to take maybe just a 5-minute break?
Let's take a break, and before you guys go on your break, we're going to get a picture really quick. So if everyone can get over here, then we want to. We'll do students first, and we'll do everyone after. I drove down here. I live in Owen County, and it's been a real busy week. Been to Louisville several times, but man, I just got on the interstate yesterday, and at section 64, they're always doing construction and stuff like that. So I just got off the ramp, and man, before I knew it, I was on top of this. It was either a piece of a vehicle or metal or something, and when it flew up, man, my car immediately started decelerating. So I managed to just get it over to the side. And with trucks and construction, it's like the worst possible place to try to get off. And that happened about 2. And so I called my roadside service thing. By the time I got it towed in and stuff, my insurance company's always been great and stuff, but it's like, I guess I got a trainee or someone who was trying to make their quota or something that day, because she was like, I felt like she was the grand inquisitor. Oh, really? Well, she was just like, could you, and she was like, could you not have missed? And I was like, well, if I could have missed it, I would, so by the time I got in, it was, but it's that's fine. I told Rebecca I was really excited about this, so. Well, and it's normal, and they were throwing a lot at them too, so. But if they can leave here today understanding that the connection with public policy, and then start working with their teams to start looking at the problems, then I think they're going to be fine. And I'm going to tell you, oh, she went to her. Yeah, sure.
And to stand up on our tippy toes.
That's great. Okay. Everybody in. So keep smiling, look at me, 1, 2, 3. Everybody keep looking. That would be great. Thank you very much.
Wow. She's fast for that.
About 5 minutes.
5 minutes is fine, yeah.
Back here in 5 minutes.
So, now, what do you do?